Hi, I'm Julia Bruton. This is about We Are Woman, a podcast exploring female and new aspects on the topic of VR.
Hello everyone, I'm here today with Deepa Mann-Kler from Belfast, actually, flew into Düsseldorf. And we're going to be talking today about VR content creation. As a woman, as an artist, Deepa, how are you? I hope your flight was good.
I am really good, and I'm very happy to be sitting here with you, Julia.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about the work that you've done before you started with VR and how the actual connection happened and how you got into VR?
Yeah, so as an artist, which was my main career before I got interested in VR, I had taken a career break in 2007. I was a deputy director with the Equality Commission. And at that point, my children were very young and I wanted to spend more time with them. At the same time, I also I'd had an exhibition the year before and that had gone really well. Most of the pieces had sold. So there was a sense of I really, really want to explore how far I can go with painting, how good I can be, because I hadn't really applied myself. So then over the next 3 years, I painted a lot. I painted around the children. My studio was in the back garden, so I always worked around them, and did lots and lots of exhibitions. And there is that saying that you need to spend 10,000 hours to become good at something. And I don't know if I did spend 10,000 hours, but I did spend a lot of time. So that then very naturally led into working in neon and light installations, which was a process that I really, really enjoyed as well. And then on the 1st of January 2016, I was in the middle of a commission, a painting for a cyclist. My father had passed away, and I was able to finish the commission, but I found it really difficult just to be in the studio. I just did not want to be there anymore. And I think I knew at the time and understood, but absolutely in hindsight, I just didn't want to sit with that grief. It felt too isolating. So that same year in November, we were on a trip to Reykjavik, and we were in a cafe. A table next to us, 4 girls were talking about an installation they had been to see, Björk's Valnycura. My husband loves Björk, absolutely loves Björk, so straight onto our phones, booked the tickets, and we went to see her VR experience, which were 8 different pieces. Now, this was in 2016, and Björk has always dabbled and been at the forefront in terms of the intersection of technology and music. And it was incredible. And by the 8th piece, you're dancing in this 360 animated world with Björk, who is a digital avatar. And that power of music and movement and embodiment and presence was something lifted, something clicked. It was just life-altering. So came back to Belfast, reached out to people, found the only company working in VR at the time, got an introduction to them. 2 weeks later, set up a new company, called it Neon, secured funding, and then 4 months later, we were at South by Southwest with Retne, which was my first VR piece, which is the word enter backwards.
That's amazing, yeah. Deepa, really. I love listening to your life work and the way that you kind of went down your path. How would you say, when you now spoke about Björk's piece, and you use the word presence, how important is that also within your work in VR and the content creation for I always call it not storytelling, but more story experiencing?
Absolutely. I think, so you get better each time you do this, don't you? Because you learn a little more each time. And in terms of the narrative, you're thinking about narrative, you're thinking about place, you're thinking about gaze and direction. But I'm also always thinking about it in terms of a person coming to it for the first time, and as we're making, we're also trying to break so that we can detect any weaknesses or poor experiences as early as possible. And I think that's a really important part of the building and making. And I think for me as a creative, VR is another tool in that toolbox in terms of creative expression. What's really exciting is that it's a new toy, but it's not suitable for everything. And I think people have to ask, is this, you look at what the problem is, and then you have to look at, well, what's the best solution in terms of resolving that problem, and not jump to the tech first. A lot of people do that because they're just completely, excited by what the tech can do, what these buttons do, whatever. So I think that's the wrong way to approach it. It should always be humanity first. And the tech should be there as a tool to teach people skills, perhaps, that maybe they can't learn in real life, but those tools can help. But the whole point is to do away with the tools, not for them to be addictive. So that's how I see it. And I think putting people first is the key. And people being front, left, and center of the whole process, end to end. And if you keep that absolutely in mind, hopefully you create something that has impact, but also touches people and stays with people.
I want to take the curve, so to speak, to your project Discover ME. But before I ask one question in terms of also the presence in this piece in the VR world, can you tell us something about the process in terms of this project? How did it start, and how did it end up the way that it is now finalized?
Yeah, sure. So the Discover ME, I was approached by Joan McParland, and she's a woman that has lived with ME, which is very similar to chronic fatigue syndrome and now very similar to the long COVID symptoms as well. She's lived with it for over 27 years. Now, Joan and her charity, Hope for Me, had worked with me a couple of years previously when I was developing Breathe VR, which was a VR app, your breath affected, made leaves in a meadow rise and fall. And it was a pain distraction VR piece. My mother had lived with chronic pain for over 30 years. So, and there were some really compelling use cases coming out of America in particular in terms of pain management. So Joan and everybody in her charity were really, really gracious in letting me come to their weekly meetings and setting up my VR. It was the HTC Vive days where laptop sensors, polls, the setup was just painful, but they tolerated all of that, and they gave really, really good feedback. So then when Joan reached out and said, I would really, really like to create something around the lived experience of people with ME, would like to do it in VR because it's so compelling. What do you think? And I was like, okay, that's a great idea. And she was like, well, can you help me? And I said, yeah, of course. So we put a funding application together and secured not a huge amount of money, but enough from NI Screen. And then in February, March, we were ready to start. We were going to do a 360 piece because I thought it would be really compelling to do this in Joan's home and to have a day in the life of, because her journey around this has been probably quite typical in terms of patients' journey with ME and the healthcare world. And then obviously COVID happened, and these group of people are highly vulnerable and couldn't be exposed to that risk. We thought about, when the restrictions had started to lift, could we somehow mask ourselves up head to toe, give her a mic, was there a way of doing this? And then we were waiting, and then we just ended up pivoting on it and creating and animation. And to be honest, I'm not glad COVID happened, but I'm glad that we pivoted because I'm really pleased with what we have. So what we ended up having was that we recorded 5-6 people's voices, lived experience. The main one is Joan, so she narrates. The group, in terms of our pre-production around this, is really inclusive. So they did a lot of research amongst their own members in terms of which stories to prioritize. So they selected Joan's story because there were key points in terms of her journey that would have resonated in terms of the messages that they wanted to convey. They selected a doctor who's lived with ME, a nurse who's lived with ME, a teacher, and then a young child. And I think that wide demographic also creates power in terms of the narrative, in terms of the range of people that are affected by this condition. And the key message is that when people have ME, they're often told by their doctors to exercise their way out of it.
Yeah, that was stunning for me. I mean, I did not know this at all.
Yeah.
But now there is an awareness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it is the worst thing you can tell somebody to do because it can set you back years. It can make you really unwell. And that's exactly what happened to Joan, just as she was starting to feel better. And she ended up being bedridden again for like another 10 years. And what happens is, because when people are unwell, they don't go to the doctor. When they feel a little bit better, the doctor then sees them. And they think that they look fine. And to be honest, looking at most people that have ME, you can't tell from their face that they have this condition. And my mother went through the same thing in terms of her chronic pain. People would come to the house and say, "How well you look." And she would go, "That's great, but I'm in pain, you know?" So I absolutely sympathized with that. And there is a pamphlet that has been produced by ME physicians, which, all the charity wanted was for this one message to go to all doctors across the UK. Now, what's happened is we have the VR piece. The charity also bought VR headsets. They have started to go out to doctors' surgeries and health centres and share this with doctors, but they've also created an educational pack around it, and they launched that in May. And in May, we had in attendance the medical directors of the 2 medical colleges in Belfast, Queen's University and Ulster University, and both deans were there, and they have now integrated this VR piece and the educational pack into their medical curriculum.
Wow, that's amazing.
Which
that
is an incredible outcome.
Yeah.
And it's Joan. I mean, Joan is a phenomena. She has done this with her team. She's absolutely incredible. So, obviously, as a content creator, I'm so proud that it's had that impact. And for everybody that's been involved, I've kept them in the loop in terms of the impact of, their work and energy, because nobody is going to be retiring, in terms of the funding around this. And I made sure that the funders knew as well, because often funders, they measure impact financially. Mm-hmm. But this can't be.
No, especially not with the medium of VR at the moment.
No.
It's, everything is building up around it, and we need to create a business model based on what the medium can do and where it can go, and not just look at numbers all the time. It's a little bit but I think that's a funding situation in general, right? I want to know a little bit about your decision in terms of the black space in the piece Discover ME. Direct question, was this a little bit due to the circumstances, or was this also because it felt like, the diminished place, the diminished possibilities for people who have this condition, for me to be able to experience some of it in terms of, a very weird kind of, I can't really see anything way. Is that a little bit the intention? Absolutely,
because they're called the missing millions, people who live with this condition, because they just disappear from life. and disappear from their gardens, from their homes, and they're almost isolated to their bed when things are really, really bad. And it's trying to create that sense of intensity of an environment, and day in, day out, when choice around movement and a life that you would have known, because often people have been well. So, generally, I don't think I never came across anybody who had been born with ME. It's a condition, so they will have experienced wellness for many periods, for a long period in terms of their life. So there's a sense of grief as well with that. And because it's a lifelong condition, some people do emerge from it. Some people learn to manage it, that they don't ever completely exhaust themselves. They watch what they eat. They go to sleep at regular time, that they really, really pay attention to self-care. So all of that, it was part of it in terms of the representation of that dark space.
Yeah, and I'm just, it's always not so productive, I'm guessing, to say, imagine if you would have shot at 360. Yeah. But just for me in my head, it would have been a different piece and a different kind of awareness for what is actually happening.
Yeah, it would have been a very different piece. I think it still would have had impact, because the power of this is Joan. It's her story. It's her voice. And she's so compelling as a human being. Her drive and purpose is crystal clear. She's just inspirational, absolutely inspirational.
She sounds like we need to talk with her too.
Yeah.
And also speaking about the part of missing light in this piece, because you had a lot of pieces with neon light, with lights in general. Does this still have an effect on the work that you do in virtual reality, thinking about light? What kind of effect it might have on us, also with the little screens? I just recently talked to someone who said it's super hard to show white in virtual reality, because of the screens, actually. So, I'm curious if that in any way plays a part when you create something or you think of something.
Absolutely, color and light. Because the two go hand in hand for me. The rainbow spectrum is a theme in my physical light installations, and that rainbow spectrum is light in terms of how we experience light and all that is illuminated through it. So both go hand in hand, and I absolutely am sensitive to you can make people feel sad, happy, uncomfortable, hopeful, energized, exhausted. There's a lot that you can do. And I think we're beginning to talk about this more in society in terms of our urban environments. We're talking in terms of carbon footprint and the climate crisis in terms of trees, but there's also something about natural light. And we all know, if we've spent a day in unnatural light, just how horrible that is. And that's one of the things I really value about being able to work from home, that, I'm surrounded by trees and I can see the sky, and we're talking now, but we can see the sky and the sun's trying to come through, and just how important that is in terms of anchoring. So absolutely, it's there. But interestingly, in the most recent piece that I created with Aura Studios, The Metaverse and Me, it's an AR exhibition. So that's the first time I've been able to combine my painting and augmented reality, and it's the first time the two worlds have merged so directly. So that's 10 paintings, and creating the AR was just the most wonderful journey. It took much longer than we thought it was going to, but huge amounts of learning and development for me and for the studio that I was working with. A co-creation process, a really interesting process in that the first piece we started with, we spent the most time on. And then when we finished, we ended up going back to that first piece because it just wasn't quite right, and redoing it. And I was talking to a musician recently, and he was saying, oh, that's what people do with albums when they record an album. They will go back and record. Yeah, and I thought, oh gosh, that's such a lovely parallel, you know, in terms of different artistic, creative art forms. And it was lovely just to, it's like, you're not crazy to do that. So that's completely normal. So we've used within that music, the importance of music and sound became so crystal clear. So we had the image, and then we were thinking of the AR, and then I was sourcing the music. And then very quickly we realized we actually need the music first, almost, even before the painting and the AR, because everything hinges on sound, the power of sound. And I think that's one aspect in terms of VR, XR, AR still, that we haven't really understood deeply enough. There are some companies that work, I mean, Darkfield does profound work through sound. And I think if we ever need a sort of a test case in terms of the power of sound, they are a really interesting go-to company on that. So that's been really wonderful to have created that piece. And there's been a bit of a bookend. So my mother passed away in February as I was, excuse me.
Oh, please take all the time that you...
As I was working on this exhibition. And one of the things that I hadn't been sure about at the time was how I was going to react. And whether, because when my father had passed, I wasn't sure if the same thing was going to happen, you know, in terms of, am I going to be able to paint? But for some reason, I mean, the grief obviously is different each time. The painting was really cathartic. And a lot of the grief and the feeling has been poured into one piece in particular, ink. And my mother had a tattoo on her hand when she was about 7. She was given money by her mother and father. She was at a fun fair, so she thought it would be a great idea to get a tattoo on her right hand and on the front-facing piece. Needless to say, her parents weren't impressed when she got home, and they scrubbed, and they couldn't get the tattoo off. But it was a talking point for the whole of her life, everybody that she met. And it's the Sikh symbol. It's called the Ek Onkar, and it means God is one. So that features in that painting on the female model, who is heavily tattooed. The piece is called Ink, but there is also Punjabi writing in there as well. And it's the first time, I think, in my sort of painting work that I've started to draw in terms of influences around race and gender. And we also explore themes around social media. There's one piece, Are You Okay?, where you're looking at a woman with a kind of wire cage on her head, and suddenly, you're holding your phone up at this piece, but the piece turns on you, and a model emerges, and she's holding her phone at you. So yeah, so it gets pretty meta, but in terms of data that's created on social media, there's quintillion bytes of data created daily, and as human beings, are we becoming data in terms of how technology companies are utilizing us? That from the minute children are born, probably my daughter's generation more so than my son's. She's 18, and it's interesting, that generational gap between her as an 18-year-old and my son as a 22-year-old, that from the minute that she's been born, that data footprint that she has left, and how that's being exploited. And how we're not talking about this enough in society. We don't talk about digital citizenship. Our schools don't talk about this. The curriculum in our schools, I think, in some respects is antiquated. It was created for another world. We need to be teaching creativity. We have so many innovative technologies happening. We have AI. And we really need to think about what it is to be human, because these technologies are here. They're here to stay. Well, how can we harness that in a way that maximizes opportunity and capability for as many human beings as possible? Mm-hmm. So, so
actually, I have to tell you something. I wanted to ask you about the process of how you approach, a piece of VR. And just by what you told us in the last 5 minutes, we can actually witness how you kind of approach certain topics. You told us how you dealt, with the exhibition. By the way, everybody can see it soon in Belfast at the XR Festival. Is that right?
No, it's so I'm director of the festival, and I always feel really convicted about it's so wrong for me to include any of my own pieces.
I absolutely believe that's not what it is.
Yeah, so I've always been, because last year when I started the festival, Joan phoned me and she was like, there's this new XR festival, can we include Discover ME in it? I said I would really love to, but it feels wrong to include a piece that I've worked on. And, I was really conflicted. So I don't know, maybe other people have said what you're saying as well.
I don't think at all that is an issue, because, it's about this medium. It's about this world that we have to build up. It's about the pieces that you do as an artist. And you have a different hat on when you're the director of the festival. And just because you are one person doesn't mean you can't have those two hats on, right? And I would say there are a lot of other people out there who are doing it. Don't feel in any way that you couldn't do it. It's if the content is right. Show it.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you. We'll bear that in mind.
But so we people could not see it.
Not at the moment. So what we've done the Metaverse ME was selected for Fivers in Toronto, which is an amazing festival. So we were delighted to be selected for that. We've been shortlisted for the European XR Awards in Steropsia. So thank you. So going to Brussels next week, all 4 of us. So I have it entered in festivals at the moment. And these are only the first 2 to come back and through. So I'm hoping it gets selected for more. So I would really... I think I would like to see that part through.
Do like a festival cycle.
Yes.
And then in the end, bring it back to Belfast, basically.
Because there's so many options in terms of, people have been asking for prints of the pieces. But I'd like to see this phase through properly, because, as you say, distribution is so challenging. And you create work. And as an artist, you want it to be seen and experienced. And I think this is a first step. And this is the first time that I've actually invested equal amounts of energy into the distribution phase. Mm-hmm. Because normally you make something and all the energy goes into that. And then it's like, it's just left there. Yeah, that's true. So I very consciously had a plan as soon as it was finished. That this is what we do. I did one opening night in Belfast, and I absolutely needed to do that. And it was the first time I've held an exhibition where selling the pieces didn't matter. All I needed to do was to hold it. And
getting it out.
Yeah, and people's reactions. We had, I think, probably about 85% of the people who came on the night hadn't experienced AR or VR before. So that whole journey for people from talking about the event had that sort of, it was again part of our thinking. So we explained what it was. We kept reminding people, bring your headphones, because music's such an important part, because there's so many people. Like, you can't have your phone playing the music. It just spoils the experience. So we were really, really mindful. And thankfully, there weren't any issues,
That is definitely a first-timer. Okay. Normally, I do hear a bulk of horror stories sometimes on the technical part. Deepa, I have a last question for you. As we're, the podcast is VR Woman. Can you talk to the listeners about you being a woman, being an artist in the field of VR. Are there challenges that you've met so far? Maybe advantages that came towards your path? Just for anybody out there thinking, I want to get into VR the same way.
It's really interesting. This is a new technology, and technology generally is very male-dominated. But I have come across so many incredible women working in this space. And I don't know whether it's the medium that has drawn women, like really, really successful women from all sorts of backgrounds, minority backgrounds, LGBTQ+, older women, younger women, just the whole gamut is represented. So if you are sitting listening to this and you're interested in getting into this, go for it, because the community, I think, is really empowering. It's really supportive. There's a spirit of sharing, and in terms of being transparent about the learning, so that we all, a rising tide raises all boats, or something like that. That's been wonderful. And one of the things that I've found as a woman going on my life journey and feeling really fortunate to be working at technology, in a sort of latter half of my career, are the opportunities that it has afforded me, because the technology is changing, and I enjoy that challenge around constant learning, which does have to be self-directed. And then with AI coming on board, taking time out every day to read newsletters or read interesting articles. I love the organic nature of that. And it's led to me being here in Dusseldorf to speak about AI and workflow efficiencies, but to approach AI from a very human-centric viewpoint. So absolutely go for it. And I am on LinkedIn. If anybody's listening, please reach out.
Yes, we will also give some information, and I wish you a wonderful day now at the T3 conference, on location actually, and I hope talking to you next year when you've actually finished the piece that you're working on right now, where we won't spill any beans, but we'll talk about this next year.
That would be amazing. Thank you so much, Julia.